You know what's wild? The moment you stop explaining yourself is the exact moment people start respecting you. Yeah, I know, sounds backwards, right? But stick with me, because this ancient philosophy is about to flip your entire social game upside down. And by the end of this video, you're going to wonder why you ever wasted breath justifying your choices to people who, frankly, didn't deserve the explanation in the first place. Listen, we've all been there. Someone questions your decision, and suddenly you're writing a dissertation on why you chose that job, that relationship, that life path, like you're defending your thesis to a panel of judges who peaked in high school. But here's the kicker. The Stoics figured out 2,000 years ago what most of us are just now learning. Silence is the ultimate power move. Marcus Aurelius didn't explain himself to the Roman Senate every 5 minutes. Epictetus didn't justify his philosophy to every critic who wandered by. And Seneca, that guy literally wrote about how caring what others think is the fastest way to lose yourself. These ancient badasses understood something crucial. Your energy is currency, and you've been spending it on people who can't even afford your attention. So here's what we're doing today. I'm breaking down the 10 most powerful transformations that happen when you finally shut up and let your actions do the talking. And fair warning, some of these are going to sting a little because you're going to recognize yourself in them. But that's good. That's growth. That's you leveling up. Ready? Let's go. Number 1, you reclaim your personal power. Every time you explain yourself to someone who didn't ask, you're literally handing them a piece of your power. Think about it. You're standing there verbally auditioning for their approval, giving them the authority to judge your life choices. And for what? So they can nod and go, interesting, and then do whatever they were going to do anyway? The Stoics called this living for external validation, and they saw it as the psychological equivalent of being a puppet. Every explanation is another string attached. Every justification is you asking permission to exist the way you want to exist. Here's the reality check. People who truly matter don't need your explanations. They trust you. They respect your autonomy. They understand that you're a fully functional adult capable of making decisions. The people demanding explanations, they're not looking for clarity. They're looking for control. Marcus Aurelius wrote in his Meditations, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this and you will find strength." But you can't have power over your mind if you're constantly outsourcing your decision-making process to the court of public opinion. When you stop explaining, you're making a declaration. I am the author of my own life, not the defendant. And that shift, that's where the magic starts. But here's where it gets really interesting. Because when you stop explaining yourself, something almost supernatural happens to the people around you.
Number 2, people start respecting your boundaries. Wild concept, I know, but follow me here. When you stop over-explaining, you create what the Stoics would call a fortress of self. Boundaries so clear that people know exactly where they stand with you. See, over-explanation is a boundary violation you're committing against yourself. You're essentially saying, my decisions aren't valid until I can convince you they are. And people smell that uncertainty like sharks smell blood in the water. They push, they probe, they demand more explanations because you've trained them to expect it. But the second you switch the script, game over. I've decided to take this path. Why? Because I have. Boom. Boundary established. No room for negotiation, no opening for debate. You're not being rude, you're being sovereign. Epictetus taught his students that we can't control others' opinions, only our responses, and the most powerful response to boundary-pushing questions is often just none, or a simple acknowledgement without elaboration. Think about the people you respect most. Do they constantly explain themselves, or do they move with quiet confidence, making decisions and letting the results speak? Yeah, exactly. When you stop justifying your choices, people adjust. They realize that questioning you isn't going to result in a 45-minute TED Talk about your reasoning. They learn that your no means no, your yes means yes, and your silence means that's not up for discussion. Respect isn't demanded, it's earned through consistency, and nothing is more consistent than someone who doesn't waver based on external pressure. Now, you might be thinking, okay, but doesn't this make me seem cold or unapproachable? And that brings us to transformation number 3, which is gonna blow your mind. Number 3, you attract higher quality relationships. Here's a truth bomb that's going to rearrange your social circle. People who need constant explanations aren't your people. They're energy vampires dressed up as concerned friends. Real talk, when you stop explaining yourself, you create a filter. A beautiful, automatic filter that weeds out the people who were only hanging around because they enjoyed having influence over your decisions. The ones who liked feeling superior by questioning your choices. The ones who got their validation from being the voice of reason in your life, even though you never asked for their input. The Stoics were big on the concept of choosing your companions wisely. Seneca straight up said, associate with people who are likely to improve you, not people who constantly need you to prove your worth to them. When you stop over-explaining, the superficial relationships fall away. And yeah, that might hurt at first. You might notice your phone getting quieter. Some people might drift off. But here's the plot twist. The people who stay, those are your ride or dies. These are the people who respect your autonomy, who trust your judgment, who understand that you don't owe anyone a breakdown of your decision-making process unless you want to share it. You start attracting people who operate on the same frequency. Confident, self-assured individuals who have their own lives figured out and aren't projecting their insecurities onto yours. People who say, "You're doing that? Cool, let me know how it goes." Instead of, "You're doing that? Here are 17 reasons why you shouldn't." The quality of your relationships skyrockets because you're no longer accepting applications from people who want to manage your life. You're building a circle of equals, not a panel of judges. And speaking of judges, let's talk about what happens inside your own head when you stop seeking external approval, because this next transformation is where the real freedom begins. Number 4, your mental clarity becomes razor sharp. Okay, so picture this. Your brain is like a smartphone. Every time you explain yourself to someone, you're opening a new app. Let me process their opinion. Let me consider their perspective. Let me run a simulation of how they'll react. Let me draft 17 versions of this explanation. Now you've got 40 apps running in the background, your battery's at 2%, and you can't remember why you unlocked the phone in the first place. That's what constant explaining does to your mental energy. It fragments it, scatters it across a dozen different people's expectations and opinions until you have no idea what you actually think anymore. The Stoics called this living in accordance with nature, specifically your nature, not your mom's nature, not your coworker's nature, yours. And you can't live in accordance with your own nature if you're constantly trying to accommodate everyone else's interpretation of what your nature should be. Marcus Aurelius was literally running an empire, fighting wars, dealing with plagues, and he still found time to write profound philosophy. You know why? Mental clarity. He wasn't wasting cognitive resources wondering what Senator so-and-so thought about his breakfast choices. When you stop explaining yourself, your mind becomes uncluttered. Decisions get easier because you're not running them through 12 different approval committees in your head. You know what you want. You know what aligns with your values. You execute. That mental bandwidth you were using to craft explanations, now it's available for actual productive thinking, problem solving, creativity, strategic planning. You know, the stuff that actually moves your life forward. Your clarity becomes your competitive advantage, while everyone else is paralyzed by analysis paralysis, stuck in the "what will people think" loop. You're already 3 steps ahead because you made a decision and moved on. But here's where it gets even better. And this is the part nobody talks about. Number 5, you develop unshakable self-trust. Let me ask you something. How can you trust yourself if you need other people to validate every decision you make? Seriously, think about it. Every time you explain yourself, you're subconsciously saying, "I'm not sure about this choice until someone else approves it." That's not confidence. That's consensus building. And consensus building is great for designing a committee newsletter, but terrible for building a life you actually want to live. The Stoics understood that self-trust is the foundation of everything. Epictetus taught that the only thing truly within our control is our own mind and choices. But if you're constantly second-guessing those choices based on external input,
you're not really in control, are you? Here's what happens when you stop explaining. You start building evidence for yourself. You make a decision. You don't justify it. You see it through. And then you observe the results. Maybe it works out great. Maybe it doesn't. But either way, you made the call and you lived with it. That's data. That's experience. That's self-trust being forged in the fire of actual decision-making rather than theoretical approval-seeking. Every time you honor your own judgment without needing external validation, you're depositing into your self-trust bank account. And over time, that account grows. You start moving through life with this quiet confidence that says, I've made good decisions before. I'll make good decisions again. And even if I mess up, I trust myself to handle it. Compare that to the person who's still asking for permission to live their life at age 35. Still crafting explanations, still seeking approval. They haven't built that trust because they've never exercised the muscle. Self-trust is like going to the gym. You don't build strength by watching other people lift weights and explaining why you chose the treadmill. You build it by actually lifting the weights yourself. And once you've got that self-trust locked in, something incredible starts happening with your decision-making speed. Number 6, your decisions become lightning fast. You know what's hilarious? Most people think being decisive means making perfect decisions. Wrong. Being decisive means making decisions, period, and dealing with the outcomes like an adult. When you stop explaining yourself, you cut out the entire middleman phase of decision-making. That phase where you're preemptively addressing everyone's potential objections, running probability scenarios on how people will react, and basically doing everything except actually making the decision. The Stoics were obsessed with this concept. They called it living in the present moment and focusing on what's within your control. You know what's not in your control? How people are going to react to your choices. So why are you spending 3 hours mentally preparing a defense for something that hasn't even been challenged yet? Marcus Aurelius said, "The impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way." But you can't advance action if you're stuck in explanation paralysis. Think about it. How much time have you wasted in your life drafting explanations for decisions? Hours? Days? If we're being honest, probably months when you add it all up. Time you could have spent actually executing the decision and adjusting based on real-world feedback instead of imaginary objections. When you stop explaining, you free up that time. You see an opportunity, you assess it quickly based on your values and goals, you decide, you move. Done. And here's the kicker. Even if some of those quick decisions don't pan out perfectly, you're still ahead of the person who's still sitting there explaining why they might potentially consider possibly thinking about making a decision next quarter. Speed is an underrated advantage in life. Not recklessness, speed. And you can't be fast if you're carrying the weight of everyone's potential opinions on your back. But let's talk about what happens to those people who used to question everything you did, because this transformation is absolutely delicious. Number 7, critics and doubters lose their power over you. Oh, this one's good. This is where you become basically immune to nonsense. See, critics and doubters operate on a specific fuel source, your reaction. They feed on your defensiveness, your explanations, your need to prove them wrong. Every time you engage, you're basically saying, your opinion matters so much to me that I need to address it. And they love that. It's validation for them. It confirms their relevance in your life. But when you stop explaining yourself, you cut off their supply. Suddenly, their criticism just sits there, unanswered, unacknowledged, like a text left unread. The Stoics had a brilliant perspective on criticism. Seneca wrote, "We suffer more often in imagination than in reality." Most of the criticism you're worried about, it's either not as harsh as you imagine, or it's coming from people whose opinions literally don't matter. When you stop explaining, you're making a statement. Your assessment of my life choices is noted and filed under "not my concern." You're not being mean, you're not being dismissive, you're just being unbothered. And doubters absolutely hate this, because their whole strategy relies on you caring. When you don't, they're left shadowboxing with air.
They might criticize harder at first, trying to get a reaction, but when they realize you're genuinely not engaging, they move on to easier targets. Meanwhile, you're over here living your life, making moves, building your vision, completely unaffected by the peanut gallery's commentary. Here's the truth. People who are actually doing things don't have time to criticize people who are also doing things. Critics are usually people on the sidelines, and you don't need to explain your game plan to people who aren't even playing. Now here's where it gets really transformative, because when you stop explaining yourself, your entire energy dynamic shifts.
Number 8. Your energy multiplies exponentially. Let's talk energy economics. Every explanation you give costs energy. Emotional energy, mental energy, sometimes even physical energy when you're having those hour-long conversations defending your choices. And here's the crazy part. You're probably not even aware of how much energy you've been bleeding out through unnecessary explanations. It's like having a slow leak in your tire. You don't notice it happening, but suddenly you're running on empty and wondering why you're so exhausted all the time. The Stoics were big on energy conservation, not in a lazy way, but in a strategic way. They understood that your energy is finite and should be directed toward things that actually matter. Seneca literally wrote about how we waste our lives in small increments, and explaining yourself to people who didn't ask is like the premium subscription to life wasting. When you stop explaining, you reclaim that energy, all of it. And suddenly you have fuel for things that actually move your life forward. Your goals, your passions, your relationships with people who matter, your health, your growth. You know that feeling when you finally cancel a subscription you forgot you had and suddenly your bank account looks better? That's what this feels like, except with your life force. People who've made this shift report feeling lighter, more energized, like they can finally breathe. And it makes sense. They're no longer carrying the weight of everyone's expectations and judgments around like a psychological backpack full of bricks. You become more productive because you're not spending 3 hours mentally rehearsing a conversation about why you started a new hobby. More present because you're not worried about crafting the perfect explanation for your choices. More joyful because you're actually living instead of constantly justifying your existence. And this energy surplus creates the perfect conditions for transformation number 9, which is honestly game-changing. Number 9. You start living authentically for the first time. Okay, real talk time. How much of your life have you been living for other people? Not in big, obvious ways necessarily, but in small, insidious ways. The career path that sounds impressive at parties, the relationship timeline that matches societal expectations, the hobbies that make you seem interesting to others rather than the ones that actually light you up. Every time you explain yourself, you're reinforcing those external narratives. You're living someone else's definition of a good life and using explanations to convince yourself, and them, that you're okay with it. But when you stop explaining, when you stop seeking approval, something magical happens. You start asking yourself what you actually want, not what sounds good when you say it out loud, not what gets approval from your family or friends, what genuinely resonates with your soul. The Stoics called this living in accordance with virtue, which really just means living in alignment with your true self, your authentic values. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "Very little is needed to make a happy life. It is all within yourself, in your way of thinking. But you can't think your own way if you're constantly outsourcing your thoughts to other people for approval. When you stop explaining, you give yourself permission to be weird, to choose the unconventional path, to say no to things everyone expects you to say yes to say yes to things that make zero sense to anyone but you. And here's the beautiful part. Authentic living is magnetic. When you're genuinely being yourself, not performing a version of yourself that requires constant explanation, people feel it. The right people are attracted to it. Opportunities align with it. You stop feeling like you're wearing a costume and start feeling like you're finally home in your own skin. And this authenticity sets the stage for the final transformation, the one that ties everything together. Number 10. You become completely unshakable. This is it.
This is the ultimate level. When you stop explaining yourself, when you've built that self-trust, reclaimed your energy, established boundaries, and started living authentically, you achieve something the Stoics called equanimity, that unshakable inner peace that no external circumstance can disturb. Think about it. What can shake you when you don't need anyone's approval? What can break you when your validation comes from within? What can derail you when you trust your own judgment completely? Marcus Aurelius faced military campaigns, political intrigue, plagues, betrayals, and personal tragedies. But he remained steady because his sense of self wasn't dependent on external validation. He didn't need to explain himself to stay centered. He just was. When you reach this level, criticism bounces off you. Not because you're arrogant or don't care about growth, but because you can assess feedback objectively without getting emotionally derailed. You can hear, "That's a bad idea," and think, "Interesting perspective, but I'm still doing it," without losing a second of sleep. You become like water, fluid, adaptive, but fundamentally unchanged by whatever container tries to hold you. People can project their opinions, their fears, their limitations onto you, and it just flows right off. This doesn't mean you become cold or uncaring. Actually, the opposite. When you're not wasting energy on defensiveness and explanation, you have more capacity for genuine connection, empathy, and love. You're just selective about where you invest that energy. You stop taking things personally because you understand what the Stoics understood. People's reactions to you say more about them than they do about you. Their need for explanations reveal their insecurities, not your inadequacy. And from this unshakable place, you can build anything, any life you want, any goal you pursue, because you're operating from a foundation of rock-solid self-assurance that no external force can crack. Epictetus said, "No person is free who is not master of himself," and you can't be master of yourself if you're a slave to other people's need for explanations. So, here's what I need you to do right now. Actually, scratch that. Here's what I'm challenging you to do, because this isn't optional if you want to level up. This is required. For the next week, just 7 days, I want you to conduct an experiment. Stop explaining yourself. Not to everyone and about everything, but pick one area of your life where you've been over-explaining. Maybe it's your career choices, your relationship status, your lifestyle, your goals. Whatever it is, for 1 week, when someone questions it, just don't explain. You can be polite. "I appreciate your concern, but I'm good with my decision. Thanks for the input. I've thought about it and I'm moving forward." That's it. No dissertations, no justifications, no explanations. And I want you to notice what happens. Notice how it feels in your body when you resist the urge to explain. Notice how people react. Notice how much mental energy you reclaim. Notice the shift in how people treat you. Then come back and drop a comment telling me what you discovered, because I guarantee you're going to learn something about yourself and your relationships that's going to change how you move through the world. And listen, if this video hit you where you needed to be hit, do me a favor, smash that like button so the algorithm knows to show this to other people who need to hear it. Subscribe if you want more philosophy that actually applies to real life, not just academic theory. And hit that notification bell because we're dropping videos every week that are designed to upgrade your mindset. I've also got a whole playlist on Stoic philosophy and practical self-improvement that's going to complement everything we talked about today. The link's in the description. Check it out after this because we go deep on concepts like discipline, resilience, and mental toughness. But most importantly, remember this: your life is yours to live, not to explain, not to justify, not to defend. The moment you stop explaining yourself is the moment you start actually living. And the Stoics figured this out thousands of years ago, which means it's timeless truth, not trendy advice. So, stop explaining, start living, and watch how fast your entire world transforms. I'll see you in the next one. Now, go out there and be unshakable.